Okay, hands down for me, Garp is one of the top 5 best One Piece characters of all time. He's just fun, very broken, and honestly, kind of like with a lot of characters, the more we learn about him, the crazier I get about how wild and broken this dude is. And very clearly, there are a lot more mysteries still connected to his character than we kind of give him credit for as well. So today, I really wanted to take some time in our classic freestyle format that has become very popular. I'm very happy you guys enjoyed. I enjoyed. I don't need a script. I'm just gonna ramble my thoughts about Garp. And there's a lot to talk about. I wanna talk about Garp's legacy, who he really is. I wanna talk about his powers, really important relationships, because he has a lot of those, and kind of what his overall character arc and story are gonna be. So just grab yourself something nice to drink. I actually have a big cup of coffee, which I'm not sure is the, best beverage to consume while recording a video, but grab one and let's get into it. Starting kind of in general with who Garp is. What's his legacy? Garp, the hero, right? Well, he is pretty, clearly maybe the strongest Marine of all time. I don't think we have seen any Marine who comes even close, potentially with, some exceptions being maybe a Kainu. Nothing we've seen from a Kainu so far looks stronger than what Garp has been doing, but I will say it would be kind of weird if he wasn't kind of up there with him. I guess Sengoku was kind of always shown to be his contemporary and they were kind of like partners, but again, Sengoku hasn't shown me anything crazy, which makes me think that he's on par or even stronger than Garp. Who else is there? Some other of the admirals. I mean, Aokiji technically defeated Garp, but also it was a little bit like Garp got stabbed in the back. There were like some shenanigans there. We also don't know if these two are in cahoots, and Garp is not in his prime anymore, while Aokiji very much is. And then who's really left there? Kong? We have no idea who he even is and how broken he is. We might get into Kong a little bit later too, He's one of those characters that I think people generally don't care about, but I, for some reason, am oddly fascinated with. What I'm trying to say is I think it's fairly reasonable to put Garp in the top 3 strongest Marines of all time, and right now, while I haven't seen a kind of do any crazy Conqueror hockey shenanigans yet, which might be, changing in the future probably when he faces Luffy or whoever. For me, he's right now in the story, based on feats alone, the strongest Marine that we have ever seen, which is, again, really crazy because Garp is one of those characters, like Roger, like Shanks, who hasn't eaten a devil fruit and just works on crazy broken hockey, but also just insane physical strength, which we don't really have an explanation for how he even got that. But we'll get into the power system and, in general, like what his moves are a little bit later. First off, again, kind of what his history is. And one of the first titles we ever really get for Garp in the story is that he's the hero of the Marines, and for almost 900 chapters it's kind of unclear why he holds that title. We kind of get this idea that he was rivals with Roger and technically kind of was the one chasing him, but obviously we learn later on that there was, more of a friendly rivalry or friendship going on between the two. The main reason Garp got this title, though, is because, of course, of the God Valley incident. And God Valley, right now wrapping up, in general, was, of course, kind of the biggest, lore drop and scale that we've got for Garp in the entire story so far. He had, obviously, the crazy fight with Aokiji, on Hachinosu, but God Valley really gave us such a big dump of new information about this character, and also a lot of questions that we kind of need to dig into as well. Now, the general story that we first hear from Sengoku when we actually first hear about Roxy Zebek as well is, this story that's kind of forbidden or taboo in the Marines, that Garp actually teamed up with Roger to take down Roxy Zebek on God Valley. The official story being, though, that Garp captured, of course, Roger, and that Garp defeated Rox himself. Turns out that's not quite how it happened. Of course, Roger turned himself in, and Rox, was defeated by Garp and Roger, and as we, of course, know, there's even more to that story where Rox kind of asked them to kill him because Emu had Domi reversied him, and all of that together kind of originally led to this kind of idea of, could Garp just be this fraudulent character where he doesn't even deserve these titles and this praise? He kind of lets Luffy get away, he doesn't do anything during Marineford, he kind of just threatens Akainu, and then Sengoku just slams him into the ground. I feel like a lot of people, maybe me included, had this feeling that, yes, Garp was a strong character who, was offered the Admiral role multiple times, so clearly he had something going for him, but I never had this suspicion that Garp might actually be beyond broken, again, because the titles that he holds kind of turned out to be all fake and not really what went down, until of course Oda, told us differently and showed us the first galaxy impact with Garp just decimating an entire town. We now know that Garp technically is legitimately the hero of the Marines, just not for the reasons that most people believe him to be that, right? So we have Garp the hero of the Marines. There is another title we know about, which is Garp the Fist, very fitting, which he actually got for defeating a character named Don Chinjiao. In case you don't remember who that is, he's the guy with the pointy hat who Luffy also faces in the Colosseum on Dressrosa. Now the backstory there is basically that Garp, fought Chinjiao when he was a pirate, and he actually slammed his pointy head into his head, which he took very personally. He's a guy, by the way, who's surprisingly proficient in hockey for being not that strong of a character. And Luffy basically punching him again kind of pops his head back out and kind of resolves that entire thing, but that's how Garp got the title Garp the Fist. Which, in terms of One Piece titles, there are a lot of cool ones out there. I think Garp the Fist sounds just very badass. I don't know, maybe that's just me. It's a very simple title, but has a fun backstory, and as we, see later on in the story, is more than accurate, because Garp fights with his fists. Now, in terms of his backstory, there's not that much that we know about Garp's past. We do know that, just like Luffy and just like Dragon, he's from the East Blue, most likely Dawn Island, though that's not confirmed, which, very clearly is important since so many of the goats of the One Piece world actually come from the East Blue, and I think the West Blue is like a close second, but, obviously Luffy, Dragon, like Ben Beckman, we have Roger himself. Garp, the Monkey Clan, does seem to have some interesting connection there to the East Blue, and I'm sure that's something that's gonna get explained a little bit later at some point in the story, because as we'll get into in the relationship part, there is something special about the Monkey family, since all of them are just this crazy broken, and they all have this like very, free-spirited, changing the world kind of vibe going on, all in their very own way, I will say, but there's going to be something special about the Monkey Clan in general. We also get actually a little image of Garp that Oda drew in his childhood, where he looks just like a young pirate, basically. Garp in general, I think, looks a lot more like Luffy than Dragon does, though young Dragon kind of has similarities with Luffy as we see on God Valley, but Garp, especially like in his younger years, has just crazy Luffy vibes going on. We see him riding here on like a tiger with all the treasure, so it's kind of curious to see how Garp even ended up joining the Marines, because it looks like the pirate life would have suited him a lot better. By the way, really funny. I'm gonna say this already just because it happened so recently and I'm very excited about it. The fact that Roger invited Garp into his crew and that was like something that Garp didn't straight out think was a terrible idea, and only after, explaining his own motives refused, is kind of a big mind blow. But yeah, Garp looks like a young Luffy, might have gone the pirate direction. Instead, though, he joins the Marine at the age of 22, which is, in case you wanted to know, 56 years before the current storyline, because Garp, at this point, is 78 years old, but still throws punches with the absolute strongest in the universe. Also, I quickly wanted to point out the fact that he's riding a tiger might again kind of hint at the Dawn Island origin, which again would make sense because we do know there is this jungle, and obviously Garp knows his way around the island whenever he visits Luffy and does some training with Luffy. So it very much seems like Garp was roaming around Dawn Island in his childhood as well, but the East Blue overall is very, tropical islandy kind of vibes, Caribbean, as we see with like Nami's village, so it could be that he's from somewhere else there, but again, it makes the most sense. He knows Dadan, he knows his way around the island, he knows the jungle, that just makes the most sense. And again, we don't really get an explanation for why he joined the Marines. We do have an idea now, obviously, that Garp wants to kind of, change the world and fight the world government from the inside. That's why he's in the Marines. He very clearly believes in the organization as a whole and sees it as a force of good, because that's the only reason he kind of pushed Dragon into joining the Marines later on, and really wants Luffy to join as well, only to, of course, be overwritten by Shanks there. And for me, he kind of embodies this group of Marines that also includes Koby and Smoker and Fujitora that, definitely are against the world government and the world nobles and Emu and so on and so forth, but still believe in the Marines as a force of good to protect the people of the world, kind of wanting to revolutionize the system from within. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think there's a fairly good chance, and curious if you agree, that at the end of the story, the Marines will very much still be around, just, in a more independent or much more fair and just version of it, where like the people who actually want good for the rest of the world and for the citizens of the world actually are in charge here, right? Maybe Koby's still too young, maybe it's gonna be Aokiji or someone else, or Smoker. But Garp is really the oldest in this entire group of people trying to build this kind of, restructuring of the Marines secretly from within. Maybe he's even the leader of Swords, something we might get later into as well, but yeah, that's kind of his mission very clearly. He believes in becoming a force of good and helping the people of the world. Was he also maybe pushed into joining the Marines by his dad? So that would be Dragon's grandfather and Luffy's great-grandfather, whoever that may be. Maybe it's Kong. I hope it's Kong. Would be cool, but it might be someone else that we just never learn about. But I really hope we get some backstory about how Garp ended up joining the Marines from being this like piratey-esque Luffy-like character in his youth to then becoming like a strong believer in justice and the Marine Force overall. There must be some backstory, especially since we see that he lets Ace die, which he very clearly sees as his biggest failure in his life, I think, at this point in the story. So there must have been some crazy event, I think, that we're hopefully gonna learn about, that inspired Garp to really join the Marines and believe in the system for such a long time, willing to sacrifice a lot of other stuff in, the process, which includes his own grandson Ace, but also his morals overall, because he very clearly despises all the higher-ups in the world government. So there must have been some crazy event where he was like, this is where I belong, this is like my life's, work. Kind of how that then happened, ironically, with Dragon finding his life's purpose in the Revolutionary Army, and Luffy finding it as being a pirate and becoming Pirate King. Kind of cool, honestly. The Monkey family, really loaded. There's like something crazy going on with them. Now, within the Marines, I think we can assume that Garp rose through the ranks fairly quickly. He was, even when he was young, a fairly broken character, as we see on God Valley, right? And even later on, where he fights Shiki then also later, when he escapes and is kind of like looking for Roger and trying to save Roger. But interestingly enough, even though his friend Sengoku is very happy to rise through the ranks, become an admiral, and at some point becomes Fleet Admiral, where then Kong stops being Fleet Admiral and gets promoted to Commander-in-Chief, is what it is, exactly. Garp, on the other hand, knows that if you get promoted higher than a Vice Admiral, you're suddenly under the direct control of the Celestial Dragons. We see this, for example, on Sabaody. Kizaru needs to come right away when the Celestial Dragons are in danger, are being attacked, by Luffy, by the way, in this case, Garp's grandson. But yeah, if you're an admiral, even though you're technically one of the all-time strongest people in the Marines and in the world government, you're still getting ordered around by the likes of Charlos, which is something that Garp very clearly wanted to avoid, so he refused this promotion multiple times throughout his life, kind of wanting to retain his freedom as a Vice Admiral, which I also think was a really smart move by Oda, not only in terms of his character story, like kind of showing his morals, but it also made all of us, I think, underestimate how broken Garp really is for a really long time, and I do have the suspicion that he did that very much on purpose, just so he could then drop Garp into the story as like this force of nature later on. And of course, we've also seen in some flashbacks, like for example, Chapter 0, where we kind of see him with his disciples, which included, of course, Aokiji, for example. And then later also when he takes in Koby and Helmeppo to train them up, which again, really funny that, the person that Luffy was in contact with then gets trained by Garp. Wonder if Garp knows about it, though then again, Koby doesn't shut up about Luffy, so probably. Anyways, my point being that Garp very clearly is a major role model for many people in the Marines, sometimes for the right reasons, as with Koby and Aokiji, just for, sharing his own morals and kind of building this sentiment against the higher-ups in the world government and the Celestial Dragons, and for some Marines, I'm sure, just based on his reputation for the person who captured Roger and the person who defeated Roxy Zebek. Again, there's like this weird kind of dualism to Garp's character that he has himself kind of had to embrace, probably forcibly also. Sengoku being very much the character here who kind of keeps him in check and kind of makes sure that he doesn't step out of line, because he, much more so than Dragon, has, Luffy's impulsiveness to a certain degree and this drive to just jump in and do something, even if maybe it's not the best move to do right now. Now, since I haven't really spelled it out yet also, what really is Garp's mission for himself in the Marines? Well, we now know he follows my own justice, which is really cold as hell, when you consider that everyone else, Akainu, has, absolute justice and lazy justice and unclear justice, all these things, right? Garp follows his own justice, which, is so similar to Luffy, we kind of know it's probably a pretty decent one. Even though, once again, it has led to some very tragic moments and has also, made all of us, I think, question at certain points in the story why Garp would still be with the Marines. Again, we now know that Garp's mission for himself is kind of to actively protect the Marines and his comrades, but also the organization by itself from Imu and, the Gorosei specifically, which is really cool. He kind of sees himself as this guardian angel of the good force in the world that's being manipulated and, corrupted by the higher-ups, using it for their own gain, for the gain of the Celestial Dragons. And that's pretty much most that we know about Garp and his backstory. Well, there's also one other thing. Just like all the other Monkey Clan members, Garp has a scar on his left eye around here, which looks really cool. We still don't know really how he got that one, but in case you haven't noticed it, Luffy has the scar in the left eye, Garp has a scar, Dragon has a whole freaking tattoo, or maybe he's been marked by flames, who knows, but he has a mark on his left eye too, which is kind of one of the, to be fair, a little bit, let's say not strongest pieces of evidence that make me believe though that Kong might be part of the monkey family too. Again, he's in the Marines, like all the monkeys apparently were supposed to be. He has a mark on his eye as well, a scar, and his name is Kong, which I mean is like as monkey as it gets, I think. But again, just pushing this agenda for no reason. I think Kong is just an interesting character that I want to learn more about, and if he was related to Luffy, that'd be kind of pretty cool, I think. Alright, but now that we have a little bit of a grasp of who Garp really is as a character, which again, we've gotten a lot recently in recent chapters, let's now really dive into the part that I think some of you will probably be the most excited about, and I am very excited to talk about, which is Garp's powers. So, as we mentioned, Garp doesn't have any devil fruits, and that just kind of makes him even more impressive and even cooler in my opinion. Which basically means that Garp's entire power arsenal is completely based on just having beyond superhuman strength. Now, I have to point something out here which I think might be relevant to you, and maybe you've thought the same thing. I actually to this day have no real idea why certain characters get super crazy strong. Like obviously devil fruits give you broken powers. We know that Haki can enhance anything that you do and thus make you kind of a god in that sense. But we kind of already know that certain people just have crazy physical strength by default, and that kind of goes for characters like Zoro, Luffy, and yes, Garp. Garp, probably without using Haki, is just throwing cannonballs more destructive than any cannon could ever fire them. Now, is this just training? Is this genetics? Is there something else going on in the One Piece world with certain people that we just don't know about yet? Or is Garp secretly just putting a little bit of Haki into all the things that he does, right? Like jumping and everything. Like, are people actually putting a little bit of, I don't know, Conqueror's Haki or Armament Haki of something into their body when they throw? I don't know why that would make you throw faster. So for now, I'm just gonna assume that it is just pure physical strength and training, which is absolutely insane. Could any character in One Piece just become this strong? Could Usopp, if he just trained hard enough, start throwing stuff like Garp? My gut feeling would be no, but maybe the answer is yes. If the answer is no, though, once again, it kind of means there must be something special about people like Garp. Maybe something, again, related to the Will of D thing. We already know that there's something special about the Davy clan and, like, their body and their right? We know that from Blackbeard and from Rocks. We know that people like Roger are insanely broken when it comes to physical power. Roger, obviously, also a D-Clan member. Same for Shanks, who doesn't have a devil fruit. Shanks is also part of the Davy clan as far as we know, and part Celestial Dragon, so it might just be that there's something about the D clan specifically that gives you actual physical boosts. Maybe. Just wanted to throw that out there because that's kind of Garp's base level. But on top of that base thing, the thing that makes Garp, one of the most broken characters in the entire story and one of the most impressive ones is, of course, his Haki mastery. He is an absolute god when it comes to using any form of Haki. We do know that Garp, yes, of course, has advanced armament. We see him throwing fists left and right, and that's kind of like the main thing that you first learn when you fight with your fists in the Grand Line, especially in the New World. You need armament Haki, you need advanced armament Haki. That's just basically a given. I think we can also pretty well assume that he does have not only, of course, observation Haki, but advanced observation Haki, which means future sight, because we know he could perceive receive Invisible Shiryu, something that at this point we actually know somehow actually negates, good observation haki. This invisibility fruit got a little bit, well, unnerved, I guess, because originally you could kind of say, oh, he's invisible, but, observation haki, I know where everyone is. No, if you have the invisibility fruit, you're actually invisible to haki too, and still, Garp kind of recognized he was gonna come just based on his future sight. And of course, Koby was told to learn from Garp since he was a master specifically in it, so we kind of have a pretty good foundation of information to assume that Garp has advanced future sight as well. And we've already seen very gloriously a lot recently that Garp thrives on Conqueror's haki, which again, looking at Garp, it's no wonder that Dragon is probably going to be one of the most broken characters in the story, and that Luffy is going to be the person who's going to become Pirate King. He has some pretty good genes, let's just put it that way. Now, an additional power that Garp may have, but it's still somewhat unclear, is the voice of all things. The reason I say this is because at the end of God Valley, when he's teaming up with Roger to take down the Domi reverse seat Roxy Zebek, David Zebek. We do know that Zebek actually, while being already not in control of his body anymore and his demon body going completely berserk, he is still able to talk or communicate with Roger and with Garp in their minds, which we assume, I think, is the voice of all things that we've kind of not really have gotten a great explanation for before, but that seems to be what's going on here. Both Roger and Garp can clearly hear Rox's true intentions of please, putting him out of his misery and protecting his family and everyone on the island by killing him. Now, I'm gonna put a little bit of a caveat here because it might just be that Rox himself is so powerful and has the voice of all things under control to such a crazy degree that he's just able to put thoughts into anyone's minds. That is a possibility, but given, that Roger already was confirmed to have the voice of all things, being able to hear the poneglyphs and stuff and the Sea Kings, and knowing that Luffy has the voice of all things, I think it's fairly likely, I would say like 90%, that what we see here is Garp also hearing, Rox's true intentions with the voice of all things, and it just makes sense that he would have that. Now, I think where it gets really interesting, though, is how Garp actually uses his haki mastery to actually, fight with it, because his weapon of choice is basically a giant ball and chain and throwing cannonballs. He's just, this is just his long-range stuff, basically. When someone's not in punchable, distance, he can or he needs, a little bit more precision, I guess. He throws cannonballs, as we see when he, kind of kindly and grandfatherly chases Luffy and the Straw Hats away from Water 7. But also, yeah, we see him fighting with the balls and chains at some point, which looks pretty badass, and very clearly his main thing is just infusing his fists and his arms with some crazy haki. Okay, I'm just gonna list you the absolutely crazy attacks that we've gotten from Garp recently and then put them up on screen here. We have Galaxy Divide, we have Galaxy Impact, which, was the first one that really went. We have Blue Meteor, we have Meteor Fist, and then, of course, the latest and the craziest to this point, Infinitum Punch, which just is basically Garp doing a Gatling gun like Luffy without any rubber powers, just going absolutely insane with it, pouring every single drop of his haki reservoir into this barrage of punches to take down Rox, together still with Roger using his ultimate move at that point. Very quickly, by the way, it's kind of insane to me as a reveal that apparently you can actually deplete all your willpower. It does make sense, I think. Obviously you could run out just of this energy, which can actually be physically used, so I think, if that was just limitless, that would be kind of too broken. But it's the first time we actually have someone acknowledge that they can just, instead of using it as a resource like stamina, we're taking all my haki reserves and putting it into one attack. I think that's the first time any characters have actively at least done that. And it's gonna be really interesting to see because Luffy obviously is very well known for depleting his entire energy reserves against pretty much any big opponent he fights. But if you can consciously choose to just, take all this crazy energy and focused and purposefully put it into one attack, that could be a real game changer that I think might even become potentially relevant against the Holy Knights and Emu on Elbaf. That little side note aside, though, I really wanted to hone in what is up with the crazy universe, space, galaxy theme that Garp is going on, because we have Galaxy Divide and Impact, right? The blue hole versus a black hole, I guess. Meteors, we have infinitum punch. Like, there's this whole space theme to it. I don't really know yet why. Obviously, we do know that, you know, space and like in general, like universe shenanigans have become a lot more important in One Piece. We have outer space stuff, we have people coming down from the moon, and so on and so forth. The real question is, does Garp have this naming scheme just because it's really cool? Or does it hint at something connected to Garp's history, or maybe even the Monkey Clan that we don't know yet? I think one interesting thing that I've been thinking about recently is that obviously we know that the Davy Clan is related to Davy Jones, but Davy Jones, who apparently was at the very least a contemporary of Joy Boy, we think, right? Or maybe even older, he already had the D initial, Davy D. Jones. So it's not Davy Jones, right? Meaning that the D initial and the Will of D might go back even further than just the Void Century, all the way to the first One Piece world. So maybe Garp is actually hinting at some, you know, universal, you know, space shenanigans with how the One Piece world was created. We also have the entire black hole theme from Blackbeard, obviously, and, you know, like absorption. And I don't know, there's a lot of universe and cosmic scale attacks recently in the manga, which I don't know, just a little bit suspicious of. It might not be anything, but I'm very curious if you have a good idea or theory why this like universe naming scheme, maybe it's just meant to make Garp look really cool, which it does, and the punches are on like a crazy level, so I think just like, if it's just a vibe, I think that works, but I kind of have a feeling there might be a little bit more to that as well. And while I was already putting, you know, these attacks up on screen here, we still gotta actually like call out the crazy feats we've recently gotten from Garp, so let's just go like through a list of stuff that he's done. He destroyed most of Hachinosu, and let's be real, probably could have destroyed the entire island if he wasn't trying to actually save Koby. By the way, good of him knowing or assuming that Koby was not in the radius of Galaxy Impact. But yeah, he destroyed most of the island with 2 attacks, just decimating an entire town with 1 attack. This was, I think, the first moment we all realized, okay, wait, hold on a second. Garp is on a whole different level than we all ever thought. One of my favorite chapters of the last years. We also know that he created pretty much a coup de burst with a single punch, right? We know he overpowered a hockey nullifying tier of Domi Reverse Seed Zebek with his fists of fire, by the way. What's going on with the infinitum punch here? There are flames coming out of his fists, and Roger, by the way, is naming his attack after a fire god from Shinto religion. I think if you want to see, by the way, a whole Roger video dedicated, I'd be happy to do it. Not sure if people, you know, if you would like to see it, let me know in the comments. But yeah, what is going on with the fire punches? Is it hockey flames? Is there something else going on? We have seen Luffy use fire powers, which didn't make sense with his rubber fruit. They make a little bit more sense with his, you know, Nika fruit, sun god and everything. But in the end, you know, like Luffy's entire devil fruit, as far as we understand it, means that his body is rubbery and he can make his surroundings rubbery, and he can kind of turn like his imagination into reality, is what we all think, you know, the Nika fruit does. We still haven't gotten confirmation, and there has not really been a good hint at Luffy actually being able to generate fire. Now we see apparently Garp generating flames. Very curious how this is going to be animated in the anime, if it's going to be like hockey flames or actual flames. Again, maybe there is just something special about Luffy's lineage that, you know, they have these innate fire powers. I personally recently talked about, like, just sorry for bothering with like little theory stuff here too. I just thought it was fun because, you know, with this thing in particular, I had this little theory that, you know, maybe all these like families, the core families, might be related to some of the gods, you know, the Davy Jones potentially being, you know, the sea god maybe, or like one of the other gods, and then kind of that entire Davy clan being connected to that. Maybe Luffy and the monkey family are connected to the sun god, to Nika in some way, like lineage-wise. Would that be a little bit too much? You know, Luffy was fated to have that fruit. Maybe. I think, like, depending on how that would turn out, I would be okay with it, but it might explain how there are like some actual base fire powers in that story. And actually, now that I think about it, we already talked a little bit about Dragon and his scar or mark on his face. If he's the man marked by flames and, you know, the monkey clan has fire powers, I don't know, it's weird. It's weird. It's really cool and it's really weird. So yeah, this probably taking down Zebek, even if it took him using his everything at once, and together with Roger, that's probably the greatest feat we have seen maybe by any person in the story yet at this point. Like, I don't know. I feel like it's absolutely crazy. It's gonna get topped, no question, but this was insane. An insane attack. Then we have obviously him destroying battleships with just no hockey. He uses battleships for like punching bags. Fantastic backstory. Again, goes to this like crazy power scaling of Garp. Where does this raw physical power come from? Insanely cool scene. We also know that he just crushed casually 8 mountains during his own training, and he punched Aokiji into a massive hole into the earth. Yeah, these are just the stuff we've been getting recently. I mean, Garp right now, of course, is being held captive at Hachinosu by Blackbeard. I think he was trying, obviously, Blackbeard to use Garp maybe to pressure the government into making him a king. We don't know what Blackbeard's up to right now. He might already be up in the Holy Land, you know, fighting and trying to get back to Imu. Now that we know a lot more about Zebek, obviously, we can assume that Blackbeard's whole plan is, you know, taking down Imu as well, maybe taking their powers, you know, maybe his intentions are more noble, even though I doubt that. But it seems at least as if Garp would probably just still be captured on Hachinosu unless Blackbeard took, you know, Garp as a hostage to the Red Line, maybe. I'm very curious. I really don't hope that Garp's gonna die. Maybe Luffy's gonna get wind of this and then he's gonna have to go and save Garp. I love Garp so much as a character. I really want him to survive if possible and do some more fighting, because this stuff just rips. It's insanely cool. But since I've already kind of like gotten a little bit into like the Luffy thing, and Luffy, of course, if he ever learned about Garp being captured, probably going and trying to pull a second Ace rescue mission, let's get a little bit into the relationships that Garp has with different people, Luffy, Ace, Roger, Rox, etc., because I think this is where it gets the most interesting for his character truly, because he's a really well-connected man that has some truly mysterious but also some just very cool relationships. So let's just kick things off. First off, quick coffee break. All right, let's kick things off with Luffy, right? We know that Garp is Luffy's grandfather. He is kind of the person who raised Luffy. I mean, Luffy to a certain degree raised himself also. He also was obviously just running around with Ace and Sabo, who were like his real family. He also had the Mountain Bandits, but Garp was his guardian, one of the people that Luffy respects the most and actually like listens to a certain degree. And Garp also trained Luffy quite a lot. We now realize, you know, where Luffy get the inspiration for a lot of his attacks from. Yes, he kind of has his own theme going on with the punches and the pistols and the guns. But, you know, the punching stuff, very clearly he got all of that from Garp, and he very clearly inspired some of his own attacks based on Garp's moves that he probably saw when Garp taught him how to actually fight. So yes, Garp was very hard on Luffy, but he did train him very well. Like, it's by the time that Luffy sets out, he's really strong, also in part thanks to Garp himself. Now on the, you know, upbringing part of things, I would say that Garp didn't do a particularly great job in raising Luffy with a lot of love. He kind of just left it to Dadan, who was like, oh, you're a woman, I guess you can raise a child, which, first of all, a little bit sexist, Garp, but also, Dada, not exactly, you know, the most loving mom character in the story either. Ironically, you know, in the end, she has a really close relationship to Luffy, and Luffy very clearly sees her as a parent figure too, really being heartbroken when he kind of has to leave. And we see all the Mountain Bandits, of course, absolutely, you know, crying and bawling their eyes out once Luffy sets out on his adventure. I honestly can't wait to kind of see, you know, Dadan interact again with Luffy. And we actually, of course, like had Dadan's interaction with Garp after Ace got executed, where she does not forgive him for actually letting, you know, Garp's grandson and her grandson die just like that, because again, the entire event was sort of televised thanks to Buggy. And later on in the story, we of course get this run-in that they have on Water 7. I think Garp is fairly friendly towards Luffy and clearly cares about him, sees him as his family, and, you know, lets him off the hook quite a lot, but is obviously very disappointed to this day that he didn't get Luffy to actually join the Marines. And I'm very curious here because it could be two things. Is he just very disappointed because, you know, of Dragon and Luffy not being Marines and trying to change the system from within and just make sure that the Marines are a good and just, you know, organization that at some point cuts ties with the world government and Imu particularly? Or could it just be that, well, Garp knows about Imu, and is he just upset because he knows that Dragon being the most wanted man in the world, and Luffy trying to become Pirate King being inspired by Shanks, and maybe even realizing earlier on, I'm very curious if Garp knows about Luffy being Nika, or having the Nika fruit and being Joy Boy, because he knows a lot. Maybe he's just really scared for his son and grandson because he knows how powerful and broken Emu is, and just being very worried that, if his two, closest family members go against the world government directly this way, he's not going to be able to protect them, and they might not have a chance against Emu, which I think could kind of be what's actually going on here, now that we do know that Garp very much is aware that Emu is at the top of everything. And again, as I already mentioned, I am very curious how Luffy's and Garp's relationship is going to now play out at the end of the story. I mean, we don't really know how Luffy feels towards Garp with the entire Ace thing. We do know that Garp stood in Luffy's way out of duty, but then let Luffy just defeat him. I don't know if Luffy is actually feeling bad towards Garp, or has feelings of, just blaming him for letting Ace die. It doesn't feel like a very Luffy thing to do. And again, my feeling would be that if Luffy learns in Elbaf or after Elbaf that Garp has been captured by Blackbeard, that he would do anything in his power to save his grandfather, is just my personal expectation. And I would be fairly disappointed if we don't get another interaction between Luffy and Garp, either Luffy saving Garp and actually being the one person who manages to pull Garp out of the Marines and be like, hey, listen, very noble that you're trying to change things from the inside, but it's not happening. I need you on my side to take down Emu. Or it would also be very nice for Garp to actually this time do the right thing and maybe see Luffy in lethal danger, but this time actually putting his family above his duty and saving Luffy's life. Maybe sacrificing his own life. I don't know. Again, I keep repeating this, but I think Garp has some very big death flags on his hand. Not just because he's being captured by Blackbeard right now, but he's an older character who's close to the main character, and he has some redemption that needs to be done, for Ace's death. I would not be surprised, at least, is I think what I would say, if Garp actually died at some point, but I really want him to stay alive and kind of be family to Luffy and be, a guide to Luffy at some point and actually help his grandson out. But I also, of course, want to talk about, his second grandson, which is Ace. Ace is, of course, kind of Garp's pseudo-grandson because, Roger basically, after really making sure that he had a son with a lot of hopes. Again, by the way, little side note, but Roger naming his sword Ace, having an attack after a fire god that's named Ace, and the entire bringing Joy Boy back. Ace, I think we can agree, right, was kind of Roger's attempt at creating the next Joy Boy himself, very clearly looking for a D-clan woman. Anyways, he entrusted with making sure that Ace grows up safely. Garp specifically, who he knows about Emu and everything, and who they fought together against the Domi Reverse Seed Roxy Zebek. I personally, again, think that Garp knows a lot more about Joy Boy Nika potentially than we all even give him credit for. So, Garp, after everything they've been to, their entire relationship with Roger, he takes in Ace as his grandson, and then does the same thing as with Luffy, and kind of pushes Ace onto Dada and is like, well, I'll sometimes drop by, but you take care of him. As I mentioned earlier, of course, as we know, during Marineford, Garp failed him absolutely miserably, putting his own duties over, protecting his own grandson, even though it does take Sengoku, who I assume actually has to put in some real effort from keeping Garp punching a hole into a Kainu in turn as well. Actually, again, this has been a point of debate. Was this, Garp being serious? Would he have attacked a Kainu? For a long time, I would have said, no, this is just Garp being angry, and he would have probably been killed by a Kainu too. At this point, I'm not so sure anymore. I think Garp probably has a pretty good shot at actually just straight up destroying a Kainu himself. I mean, he can spar with Aokiji without any problems, and, Aokiji needed some help, quote unquote, to take out Garp. And we don't know what's going on between those two. We'll get into that. But again, I think there's a pretty fair argument to be made that maybe even if Akainu wasn't 100% aware that Garp was jumping at him, he might have just straight up killed the dude. But he didn't in the end, and he also just allowed the entire execution to happen to begin with. Even standing in Luffy's way, even if it was more symbolically and he wouldn't have done anything to Luffy. And I guess also to his credit, similarly as with Luffy, and maybe even more so than with Luffy, he kind of tolerated Ace not becoming a Marine and doing his own thing and becoming a pirate. Again, I do wonder if he was very much aware that that was the plan that Roger had for Ace all along, and that's why he was kind of a little bit more willing to let Ace go and become a pirate than he was with Luffy, who he wanted to not become a pirate under any means necessary at all, and still couldn't stop that. So again, I think he kind of respected that Ace was going to be his own man, and that Ace was always obviously living in the shadow of his father and with that heavy burden. I don't know if Ace knew something about what Roger actually wanted him to become. Probably not, but, that might have probably contributed if he was aware that he was supposed to become Joy Boy. And as I already mentioned earlier, we had then this scene after Ace's death where he returns to Dawn Island. Luffy is in Ace's hometown and Sabo's hometown, and just lets Dadan, slap him into oblivion for, failing Ace. And I think you really get the feeling at a certain point that Garp kind of broke a little bit on Marineford, if that makes sense. He's obviously not the only person who we see a little bit broken later on in the story, but he's just not really been the same ever since that incident, and you can kind of see even the entire rescue mission for Koby. He tries to make up for his failure with Ace and then is very, very quick to just sacrifice himself for everyone else. He probably would have done something similar if really necessary anyways, but you kind of get this feeling that this guilt is really still eating at him, right? Every time we see him after the time skip, you kind of get the feeling that he's quit his regular marine work that he's been doing before and just, that's clearly 100% because of Ace's death. And this actually leaves us with a couple of really interesting questions. Does Garp feel like he failed his promise to Roger in this case? Does Garp resent himself that heavily for, his lack of action? Did Garp rate Hachinosu because he refused to let all that happen again? I think the answer to all of this is yeah. Pretty clearly that's what's going on here, right? And again, the fact that Garp almost too willingly lets himself be taken prisoner, kind of, allowing that way Koby to get away. I don't know, it kind of feels like it's setting up this entire story arc of now Garp taking Ace's role, and, will Garp actually be the centerpiece of another major conflict, as we talked about earlier with Luffy, or potentially even the world government? Garp actually being, I don't know, this time used as the bargaining chip, or as the, figure to lure out Luffy potentially and make use of Luffy that way. Depending also, of course, what goes down on Elbaf. I mean, I could see a world where Luffy really irritates Emu one way or another, and Emu is like, well, I have your grandfather and I'm gonna kill him if you don't come to me. That could legitimately be something that I could see happening after Elbaf right away. Now, you might make the argument, would it be boring to have a very similar, kind of setup for two arcs? One, it's, Luffy's brother, then it's Luffy's grandfather, both taken by Blackbeard, both then kind of used as a bargaining chip by the government. But at the same time, we do know that, Oda loves taking similar story plots pre and post time skip, kind of going the same way, but then having some very key twists in the story, obviously Alabasta, Dressrosa, and so on and so forth. You can even have the entire Eket Island and Sabaody arc, or Wano and Thriller arc. There's a lot of stuff that's just paralleling each other with a lot of twists and turns. So maybe this time the, entire point is that Luffy is successful and strong enough to actually save and protect his family successfully, which would be quite moving, and maybe in a way would be a nice piece of, catharsis, and also, I think, redemption for Garp, because he kind of almost wants to sacrifice himself, but then Luffy this time is the one who's actually saving him, not only from his failure, but also saving Garp from the government itself. That would be, actually, now that I think about it, maybe the most Luffy thing to do. Taking someone like Garp in this case, and pulling them out of their guilt and out of their darkness. Because as we know, Garp is not a bad character. He tried to do the right thing by sticking to his morals and principles. But again, I think he's someone that needs saving by the Sun God, by a Luffy, by his own grandson. And I think he has a lot still to teach, or, tell Luffy as well. So again, this could be an arc that I personally would absolutely love to see, and that could be really exciting, I think. And also, while we're talking about Luffy and Garp once again, let's just throw in the third person in there as well, the middle part, if you will, Garp's son and Luffy's father, Dragon. Now, if I had to summarize what their relationship feels like, it's basically father and son with a very strained relationship due to certain things that happened in their past, a lot of it, which we now know, on God Valley. It is kind of unclear at this point if they're actually in contact. It does kind of, feel like it's being implied that they chat, at least, according at least to Garp during Water 7, right? They have some sort of communication, which kind of crazy when you think about what Dragon actually is to the world government. But then again, maybe not as surprising knowing that Garp is very much against Emu, and that's kind of Dragon's entire point. It's also very interesting, I think, that Garp doesn't particularly seem to care that people know that his son is Dragon, despite their factions being pretty much as polarly opposite to each other as like humanly possible in One Piece. If there's one group that's even more problematic and antagonistic to the world government and the Marines than pirates, it's just the Revolutionary Army, which Dragon founded and is the leader of right now. Their entire mission is abolishing the world government in its current form. And yet, ironically, based on everything that we saw now in God Valley, it seems like their goals might actually be somewhat aligned in a very weird way, because Garp is clearly trying to change the system from within, while Dragon, well, was like, no, being in the Marines does not work. I need to actively form an organization that frees the world and the people from this rule of the Gorosei and Emu actively, the revolutionaries. And again, we know that Dragon, funnily enough, doesn't want to do anything about the Marines or even the kings of the world. Like, they want to get rid specifically of the Celestial Dragons system altogether, which also seems to be Garp's goal. So at this point, I'm even wondering if they're secretly almost working together, or at least are in accordance with each other. After all, Dragon very clearly still, trusted Garp to raise his own son that he cared so much about. As we now know, he always seemed like one of those very bad fathers in One Piece or in anime overall. After the God Valley flashback, I personally think that Dragon might be the most kind-hearted and emotionally sane person in this entire story. He was quite literally the only one out of all the Marines on this island who was like, sorry, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to make sure none of these innocent civilians leave the island so the Celestial Dragons can slaughter them all and hunt the slaves and whatnot. How about we don't do that? He was the only one who did that, the only sane person, to the point where he even rebelled. Like, he not only punched the Celestial Dragon, he rebelled against his superior, forcing them at gunpoint to actually take some innocent people off the island with them just to save some lives. And caring obviously for Shamrock and for Shanks and trying to save their lives, being very heartbroken when he feels like he's failed that task. And as we see during Kuma's flashback, Dragon is obsessed with Luffy's safety and making sure he's okay. The only reason he's not really engaging with Luffy clearly being that he doesn't want to, be associated and put his son in danger, by being the most wanted man in the world, which, now it doesn't kind of work because Luffy himself is one of the most wanted people in the world. But very clearly, it's all out of love, and that's the reason he always stands and looks east, probably, looking towards his son that he really loves and cares about. And if we compare that with how Garp kind of experiences God Valley, he takes a lot longer to catch on that this is kind of a little bit messed up until he reaches out to Sengoku, obviously, and is like, sorry, did you know about what we're doing here? And then, obviously, he learns about Emu, and he's not, I think Dragon is clearly the smartest out of this, family group, but nonetheless, Garp at the end comes to the same conclusion. The world government is evil very clearly with Emu and needs to be taken down, but again, doing it from within, and they might actively actually be working together. I mean, how was their relationship even after God Valley? I'm very curious, because no way that Dragon stays in the Marines. Even if he didn't actively leave them right away, which I'm pretty sure he did, then he would have just been kicked out, right? So Dragon easily cutting ties here. How did it, feel for Garp? And Garp probably resenting Dragon for leaving the Marines maybe, but maybe also Dragon resenting Garp for not taking the step that he very clearly took as the right thing to do, which is, I'm not going to be part of an organization that, enables these crazy rich people who rule from the top of the world to hunt slaves and innocent people. Also, one more question I have for their relationship. Did Garp train Dragon? Because if so, Dragon must be an absolute goat anyways. I mean, I've been saying this for a while now. I think that Dragon might just straight up turn out to be the second most important character in One Piece next to Luffy. And I think that's the main reason why we still know so little about him, because Oda is saving all that stuff for the end game. Again, I think Luffy and Dragon together are kind of the people who will make the biggest difference probably. But yeah, I'm just expecting Dragon to be maybe even more powerful than what we see Garp. I mean, he kind of must be, right? If he's the one who's supposed to actually take on Emu. He knows about Emu now very clearly too, so I don't know. I feel like he should be aware and have some sort of plan of taking them down, and if Roger and Garp and all the Yonko and Rocks together couldn't hurt Emu, Dragon must have some sort of power or plan to do what all these crazy goats couldn't do. And as we can kind of see, Garp is falling really heavily into this mentor kind of overall pattern. We see it with Dragon probably, with Luffy, and of course, the next two people I have on the list here, which are Koby and Kuzan and their interaction and relationship with Garp as well, because Koby and Kuzan are also two absolutely big figures, massive figures for the endgame of the story. Koby, of course, being the maybe fastest growing and developing character in the entire story. You know, going from pink-haired little kid to like an absolute tank in 2 years. I think in terms of just pure growth rate, definitely outpacing even Luffy. And Kuzan being, you know, one of the contenders for Marine Fleet Admiral and now being one of the 10 Titanic captains. By the way, I don't believe for a second that he's actually evil, but he is technically a pirate right now. Evil? Come on, Oda. But yeah, two crazy, powerful characters that will play a massive role at the end of the story, both students of Garp. And very clearly with Koby, Garp believes that this guy, this kid, is gonna be the future of the Marines. I mean, we know that Koby's dream is becoming a Marine Admiral, and whether he will actually be the person to lead the good Marines at the end of the story, or whether he's just gonna be a very high-ranking member like an Admiral, will have to be seen. But Garp has clearly been placing all of his hopes and knowledge and kind of his will onto Koby. Again, we saw that he was very much willing to risk and sacrifice his own life to save Koby, and he very clearly believes that the life of the young is so much more valuable than the life of the old. This is like a general theme we kind of have in One Piece with a bunch of characters where the next generation kind of is much more important than the old guard who has already served kind of their purpose, right? For me, some big questions with Koby and Garp are, will Koby, you know, save the day and try to save Garp in return? That seems like a very Koby thing to do. And what will Koby actually reveal about Garp's true nature once Koby makes, you know, a more active appearance in the story again? I'm obviously very excited to see what Koby and Luffy's relationship will be once they reunite once again. And I think Garp is just this big factor that kind of connects the two. I don't know, I think there's a lot of potential there, and I think Koby particularly, obviously, will not only tell us more about Garp, but also has been shaped by Garp into one of the final characters that will make a crazy impact at the end of the day. Kuzan, on the other hand, was, of course, the original prodigy before Koby that, you know, Garp was trying to raise into doing the right thing within the Marines. Garp was his original mentor. We again learned this in Volume 0 and the entire Strong World canon pre-part that got released with it. And Garp was pretty much the person who trained Kuzan into becoming an admiral and taking him up to admiral level. It also very much seems like Garp inspired Kuzan to follow his own sense of justice and like learn what true justice was, right? Because Aokiji is kind of the only person who right from the beginning when we first meet him is on like this weird quest of finding himself and finding out what his real justice is supposed to be and kind of being unclear what good and bad already is. Very clearly he got all of that from Garp, and Kuzan does the very same thing. Like, it's lazy justice at the beginning, but he kind of hones in on what is actually the right thing to do very early on and is kind of the most clearly against the like black and white style of government that Akainu has, for example, or the Gorosei have, until maybe Fujitora comes into the story, who's even crazier. Though I gotta say, I still have a gut feeling that Fujitora might just straight up be a revolutionary member that has infiltrated the government. We'll see if that comes true. And as I already kind of teased earlier, there is 0% of me that actually believes for a second that Kuzan has gone evil and was like, oh yeah, well, you were my mentor, I don't care about you at all anymore, I'm gonna kill you. My attack was too weak to kill. Yeah, come on. Like, Kuzan didn't kill Garp very clearly because I think that they're still in cahoots with each other, whether that's through sword or in some independent capacity. Kuzan is, I think, heartbroken. He needs to fight and, you know, hurt his former master, and I think he's on this entire mission to infiltrate the Blackbeard Pirates. Again, I think Oda is trying to have us believe so badly that Kuzan is bad now. I think it's all fake. But, you know, I might be wrong about this. Very curious how you see this, maybe. I think he very clearly froze Garp in a very kind and protective way, the same way he did with Saul, as we found out. Saul wasn't killed, he got defrosted. Luffy wasn't killed, he got defrosted. Robin didn't get killed. You know, you get the idea. He's kind of pretending to be this bad guy, now in the form of a pirate. but not actually. And I think him and Garp very much still have a very intact relationship. Obviously, this entire interaction and fight that he has with Garp kind of makes us wonder, okay, could this reveal that Kuzan is actually still a Marine or even a revolutionary now? Would be really cool if Garp, connected Kuzan with Dragon after Kuzan was kind of like, no, yeah, I'm not gonna be part of a Kainu's military and army. That would be a really fun thing if, Garp was like, well, if you're leaving, may I introduce you to my son, who also is not a fan of the government, by the way. That would be a really fun reveal as well. Then there's also obviously a character that is shrouded in so much mystery, he might just be the mystery man himself, which is Garp's right-hand man, Bogard, who is just a very cool character, I think mostly because we know nothing about him. All we really know is that he's been with Garp at least ever since the God Valley flashback, so for decades as his sidekick. We know he's a very powerful swordsman, we know that he helped Garp train Helmeppo and Koby, and he seems like a real nice guy who's very loyal to Garp, but really, who is he? Is Bogard like his buddy that he's been like friends with ever since they joined the Marines? Or is he more like Garp's watchdog? Or kind of like almost more loyal to Garp than to the Marines itself? Does Bogard maybe on the other hand keep him in check and keep an eye on Garp from someone else in the government? I'm very curious to find that out. My gut feeling here would be that Bogard is very loyal to Garp, but it might just be that, Sengoku could have said like, hey, you stay with Garp no matter what happens and tell me what he's up to. Would be honestly not the most unreasonable thing to do from the government's perspective. And speaking of the big Buddha himself, let's also talk about Sengoku, because for these two, we know that they are best buds and they are much more on this like same level rival friends rising through the ranks together type of vibe. We do know that they became vice admirals together. We do know that probably they would have become admirals together if Garp had actually wanted that. And Sengoku trusts Garp with a lot of personal info, like for example the true nature of God Valley, and they have a very close and trusting relationship. We also do know that Garp always goes to Sengoku when he needs some real information and some real advice. The only thing that seems to be different is that Sengoku is a lot more loyal to the higher-ups as far as we can tell, because he was very much willing to become an admiral and then fleet admiral. Though then again, maybe Sengoku's entire thing was like a mini version of Garp and Dragon, where Sengoku was like, well, I actually think I can have a bigger impact if I'm leading the Marines, even if I have to listen to the Gorosei, but maybe I can learn some info and stuff, while you stay independent and do your thing, Garp. I hope that's what's going on, because Sengoku does feel like a fairly good-intentioned or well-intentioned character and very kind-hearted to a certain degree. He kind of tolerates a lot of stuff and, allows Shanks to end the war and so on and so forth, while Akainu seems to be the much more brutal, like, let's kill everyone type of approach. Sengoku has been kind of sidelined, very similar to Garp. They kind of were just like lingering around and annoying everyone who was in Marineford, kind of like doing their own thing. So I'm very curious if he's gonna do anything to help save Garp, because technically he doesn't really have anything to do right now, and it would feel kind of weird if Sengoku would just leave Garp to die. So if there is an effort to save Garp, I do feel like Sengoku would be a very obvious choice for someone who would be included in that group. Then, let's of course also talk about the two most important characters and the two people that we actually saw maybe the most now in terms of relationship during the God Valley flashback, which is Roger. Roger's relationship with Garp is actually really interesting, because obviously they kind of started out as probably just kind of the smoker Luffy relationship where, Roger was this upcoming rookie who became stronger and stronger, and, Garp took an interest in him and wanted to catch him. Then at some point they actually became rivals, where Garp was not interested whatsoever in going to God Valley until he heard that Roger was there, upon which he just left the swimming pool and ran straight to that island. Then, of course, he teamed up with Roger to actually take down Zebek, and eventually was the man who captured him, quote-unquote, because in the end it's Roger, of course, who turned himself in with the plan of starting the big pirate era, and entrusted Garp with his own son, who, again, we got into this. Very clearly, Roger thought Ace was going to be very special, was going to become the next Joy Boy, and he entrusted that entire future and his entire plan, this like crazy scheme to make sure the next person finds the One Piece, finds Laugh Tale, brings the dawn. He entrusted that entire thing to Garp. Now, we just don't know quite yet. Was it just due to the bond that the two forged during God Valley, fighting together against rocks. Why did Roger ask Garp to join his crew after this happened, actually? Do they have some other shared history we don't know about yet? It kind of feels like there is something still missing from their relationship that, Oda's kind of holding back still. This might again go into the idea that potentially Garp knows a lot more about the true history and maybe, his own family's role in everything than we kind of have a feeling for, and maybe he knows a lot more about Luffy, and that's kind of why he's so, very, unhappy with how things turned out with Luffy and him not joining the Marines. I don't know. I feel like there is still a puzzle piece missing. And of course, Garp owes his entire legacy somewhat to Roger. I mean, yes, Garp probably deserves the title Hero of the Marines and Strongest either way, but as we mentioned, it's kind of a fraud because Roger helped him take down Zebek, and Roger turned himself into Garp. He didn't really do anything about that. Nonetheless, again, power level wise, I think it's fine. Probably though, still something that very much eats away at Garp because he's kind of been living a lot of lies in his life and kind of is putting his own sense of honor a little bit behind, I guess, whatever his ideal and big plan is. So maybe there is just this master plan that Garp really has. It kind of feels more and more like that. Obviously, both Roger and Garp share that they are D-Clan members, which again, I think does mean something very important. Maybe both these families, the Monkey Clan and the Gold Clan, probably have certain roles. At this point, I kind of feel like all the D families have certain roles that they used to fulfill or still have to fulfill. And again, it kind of makes you wonder, does Garp know a lot of the stuff that Roger actually did and found out? Very similar to, what Roger then told Whitebeard later on before he died. Maybe, possibly not, possibly so. I'd be very curious to find out if that was actually the case, because that would kind of change a lot about what I thought about Garp too. And I think another question that people genuinely ask themselves about these two, they share such a similar vibe overall in their personalities and how they approach things, like this very Luffy-esque thing. Why did they hate each other? And I guess the answer at this point is that they really kind of didn't. I mean, Roger very clearly respects and seems to appreciate Garp. Same with Zebek, actually. And I don't think that Garp necessarily hates Roger. I think he just kind of hates Roger's choice to become a pirate and what he represents, if that makes sense. And maybe in a way, Garp can actually see the consequences, of these super carefree, types of people like Roger was too, his super carefree nature, and the consequences this can bring, and that's the reason he wanted to stop that. Because obviously this is the exact type of personality that also drives Luffy, and is probably why Garp originally, wanted him to be a Marine in the first place. By the way, I put a lot of effort into drawing, not really, but I do put effort into drawing these, and keep an eye out for them because I've been putting them in the videos. My fantastic art skills. Bottom line though, I think with Garp and Roger's relationship is that Garp really hates bad pirates mostly, and Roger accidentally helped create a lot of those, I guess. But let's talk about one who clearly wasn't that bad of a pirate, even though we all were told he was one. Davy D. Zebek. I'm not gonna say rocks anymore. I'm really gonna try and stop. All right. So, we do know, same as with Roger and Garp, that Garp and Zebek also had quite a lot of mutual respect for each other. Yes, they did battle it out to the death, but again, it was not because they hated each other, but because Imu was forcing Rocks to do so. And I called him Rocks 2 seconds later. It's so hard to get rid of that habit. All right, well, I mean, obviously, they were willing to fight alongside each other against Imu, including Roger. They were all immediately like, yeah, whatever our beef amongst each other here is, this thing takes priority. No questions asked, they all jumped in right away. Same as with Roger, both Garp and Zebek are D-Clan members. I mean, Zebek knows about Garp's distaste of the Marines' top brass very clearly. Wherever from, they must have talked before, I think. Do they have some deeper history too? I'm kind of curious about. It does seem again like they had run-ins with each other too, because Zebek very clearly speaks well of Garp and kind of wished that he was a pirate. I had this theory many years ago that maybe Garp, Roger, and Zebek even grew up together and had this group that Asaw and Luffy had, and I'm not sure that this probably does make a lot of sense, even though it's technically still possible, but I kind of wonder if at least Rocks and Zebek kind of had this sort of relationship maybe where they were allies or friends and then kind of took very different places. Imagine though if we find out that Garp, Rocks, and Roger actually, were this trio back in the day and then they split into different, factions. I think the fact that Zebek is from God Valley in the West Blue kind of puts a bit of a nail in the coffin, but maybe they met later on in life and kind of became friends and then split that way. Because obviously we now saw in the flashback how Zebek started his own pirate crew, so we don't really know what he did before that, what he was up to, what inspired him to go up against Emu. There still actually is a whole earlier history to this entire thing that we don't know about, and Garp might well be a part of that as well. And of course, Garp now knows about Emu ever since God Valley happened, very much thanks to Zebek and this entire event, and Zebek drawing out Emu to begin with. And it does really make you wonder how Zebek and God Valley overall really impacted Garp's outlook on life, on his entire philosophy, on his big plan. And I'm very curious if you ask Garp nowadays if he would acknowledge Zebek as a tragic hero, someone that he respected too. I mean, does Garp also realize that Blackbeard is actually Zebek's son? Because he feels like one of the people who should be able to put the clues together, right? And how did Garp react to God Valley afterwards, kind of before and after Zebek's death? How did he, treat this entire event? Because again, it's kind of weird that so many people were on God Valley and then they never really talked about Emu or Zebek until, Sengoku mentions him very, very late in the story. And I feel like this question of how God Valley and how his relationship with Roger and Zebek affected Garp kind of leads me into another really interesting section that I wanted to talk about in this video, which is, of course, Garp's future in the story. And here I really just want to go through some questions I've written down and kind of give you my 2 cents on it, but I'd really love to hear your thoughts on all of these as well. These are kind of open-ended and I have some gut feelings, but let's just jump in, right, shall we? All right, first question I wrote down for Garp's future: will the Monkey Clan ever reunite again, right? And I think this is a fairly legitimate question with everything we've talked about. Garp and Dragon have some sort of relationship, but it does not seem to be the best. Will Dragon ever try to do something with Garp again? Will Luffy come and save Garp? Will there be a moment where we have Garp, Dragon, and Luffy fight together on screen, which would be like my Christmas, Easter, birthday, everything at once in the One Piece world? If that ever happens, imagine the entire monkey family coming together, including Kong. I'm just kidding. Maybe, who knows? And, battling it out together. That would be absolutely fantastic. Again, I have this feeling that there is more to the monkey family and clan in their history particularly, whether it's some secret mission or some secret power or whatever it may be. I think that Garp is the key here to revealing that. And again, I think having this family reunion would be absolutely fantastic, though who knows if we're actually gonna get it. I am also curious, as we've talked about throughout this video, will Garp actually make it to the end of the story alive? And this kind of comes down to what Oda's plan here is. Does he want to give Luffy the chance to save a family member successfully this time compared to Ace? Is Garp kind of being punished by Oda for not doing the right thing and saving Ace back at Marineford? And will he kind of need to sacrifice himself or die for his sin, quote unquote, for taking the wrong route? We already mentioned a few scenarios where Luffy goes to save Garp on Hachinosu, or Blackbeard brings Garp and gives him to the Marines, and then Emu uses it as a bargaining chip, or someone else goes and saves Garp. But there's also so many ways that he could possibly just die. He is in a really bad spot right now, frozen and kind of impaled with his wound. So I don't know. I think really it's a coin flip at this point what might happen. Very clearly though, it's gonna be a very big story plot that hopefully, I really expect is gonna involve Luffy and the Straw Hats. I would absolutely love for there to be another Marineford-esque type, arc after Elbaf maybe, where before we even make it to Laugh Tale, it might just be first the Garp rescue arc, which could be a really fun thing, including Blackbeard, including the world government, but maybe not quite yet on that, all-in Laugh Tale showdown level that we all expect I think is gonna happen. And this kind of goes into my next question too, which is, will Garp actually atone for Ace's death? I mean, one option, as we just said, is that he needs to sacrifice himself to atone for it. It could also be, though, that, as we also talked about, that he actually is the one who saves Luffy this time when Luffy's in a pinch. Maybe Koby or Sengoku or Kuzan actually free Garp, and then Luffy's in a really dark position, but this time Garp gets the chance to save his grandson and actually do the right thing, that would also be a really nice way for his arc to go. And in that context also, how is his relationship with both Koby and Kuzan gonna play a role in this story? Because again, I do expect Kuzan to at some point flip and betray Blackbeard, and we don't really have a good feeling yet for what Koby is actually gonna do in the story and how big his impact is gonna be. But it does feel like Oda setting them up to be top players in the final war. I mean, we get the big panel with all the players for Laugh Tale and everyone who's like kind of like chasing after the One Piece, and they're in there. So I do expect them to play major roles at the end. But probably the biggest question I have is if Garp is actually gonna have the chance to confront Imu once again, or just reveal something about them to the world that we didn't know Garp actually knew. Again, this could be kind of mixed in all of these previous points. It would be really cool to see Imu face Luffy, the Pirate King potentially, Dragon, the head of the Revolutionary Army, and Garp, the hero of the Marines. 3 generations of monkey family members in 3 very different roles and factions of the One Piece world, all working together in, this crazy panel where they stare down the ruler of the world, all coming from very different, angles and aspects. That would, like, if I could pick a way that the showdown works with Imu and Luffy, having Dragon and Garp there would be, I think, easy, like, top 3 choices that I would love to see in the story. So we'll see how it all turns out. As for now, I hope whatever you've been doing while listening to this or watching this maybe even has been successful, whether it's eating, hope it was good, or cleaning. If you want to support the channel, please check out our Patreon. We have a lot of really great stuff there, and it helps me also, pay the artists, pay the editors who make this all happen as well. I could never do this all on my own. And also, I'm really happy if you watched this till the end, because doing these long-form deep dives has been really fun, because I could just get to ramble and have fun. We're talking about One Piece, and the fact that you seem to enjoy it means a lot. So appreciate that. And I will see you in the next one. There is another really big deep dive into Imu, if you're curious about it, since we just talked about them. And yeah, bye.